A first-class ticket, a neurosurgeon's credentials, a decade of groundbreaking medical success. None of it matters to Patricia Wellington, who can't fathom why Dr. Marcus Carter belongs in her section of the plane. But as flight delays mount and tensions rise, a simple seat assignment unravels something far darker than prejudice. Sometimes the highest price of privilege is the truth it tries to hide. Dr. Marcus Carter checked his boarding pass one more time, seat 2A, first class, a small luxury he allowed himself after 3 exhausting days at a neurosurgery conference in Boston. At 38, he was one of the youngest department heads at Atlanta General, though his salt and pepper hair often made people assume he was older. Today, dressed in his usual travel attire of crisp chinos and a cashmere sweater, he could have easily been mistaken for a corporate executive. The gate agent smiled warmly as she scanned his ticket. "Thank you for flying with us today, Dr. Carter. We're beginning priority boarding now." Behind him in the priority line, a woman in her 50s clutched her designer handbag closer, her jewelry clinking softly. Patricia Wellington had spent her life in spaces she considered exclusive: country clubs, private schools, and, yes, first-class cabins. Her world was ordered, predictable, and most importantly, carefully curated. Marcus felt her eyes on him as they walked down the jet bridge. He was used to it. The looks, the assumptions, the subtle and not so subtle questioning of his presence in certain spaces. 15 years of medical practice hadn't changed that reality. The flight attendant at the cabin door, Sarah Chen, greeted them professionally. "Welcome aboard. First class is to your left." Marcus turned left. Patricia Wellington's sharp intake of breath was audible. "There must be some mistake," she announced loudly, addressing Sarah while gesturing at Marcus. "He's turned the wrong way." Sarah checked Marcus's boarding pass again, though she didn't need to. "No mistake, ma'am. Dr. Carter is in 2A. Patricia's face flushed. "But I'm in 2B. Surely you don't expect—" She left the sentence hanging, its implications clear in the recycled cabin air. Other passengers were backing up in the jet bridge now, trying to hear the developing situation. Marcus had been here before. He'd learned to handle these moments with a calm that some mistook for acceptance. It wasn't acceptance, it was strategy. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "we should all take our assigned seats so others can board." "I most certainly will not," Patricia declared, her voice rising. "I paid full price for first class. I expect certain standards to be maintained." Sarah's professional smile tightened slightly. "Ma'am, Dr. Carter is a legitimately ticketed first-class passenger. If you're uncomfortable with your seat assignment, we can try to accommodate you elsewhere in the cabin." "Elsewhere?" Patricia's laugh was sharp. "I'm not the one who should be seated elsewhere. This is obviously some sort of mistake. A computer glitch or... She fumbled in her bag, producing her phone. "I'm calling your corporate office, and my lawyer. I have status with this airline. I fly first class twice a month. I know the type of people who usually..." Again, she left the implication hanging. The line of passengers in the jet bridge had grown silent, watching the scene unfold. Marcus noticed several phones being raised, their cameras capturing what everyone knew was about to become a viral moment. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" The man who stepped forward was in his 60s, distinguished-looking in an expensive suit. William Preston III, CEO of Preston Financial Group, was also a frequent first-class passenger. He was also, as it happened, on the board of Atlanta General Hospital. "Bill?" Patricia Wellington's tone shifted to relief. "Thank goodness. Perhaps you can help explain to these people about first-class standards and protocols." Preston studied the scene carefully, his eyes moving from Patricia's expectant face to Marcus's composed one. "Dr. Carter," he said slowly, "I didn't know you were at the Boston conference. How was your presentation on minimally invasive techniques?" The air seemed to leave Patricia Wellington's lungs all at once. Her phone slipped slightly in her manicured grasp. You know him?" "Know him?" Preston's eyebrows rose. "Dr. Carter is pioneering surgical procedures that are revolutionizing our entire approach to neurological trauma. In fact," but before he could continue, another complication arose. A flight attendant approached Sarah with an urgent message, something about engine maintenance and delayed departure time. As the news filtered through the cabin, Marcus noticed a subtle change in Patricia Wellington's expression, a flash of panic quickly masked. "How long is the delay?" she demanded. "I have to make a connection. I have to be in Atlanta by..." Her voice trailed off as she glanced at her phone, reading what appeared to be an urgent message. Whatever she saw made her face pale considerably. Marcus's own phone buzzed. A news alert about a major financial investigation breaking in Atlanta. Something about banking irregularities and federal indictment. The pieces hadn't quite connected yet, but something was building. Patricia Wellington's increasing agitation, her desperate need to reach Atlanta, the breaking news. It was all part of a larger story, about to unfold at 35,000 feet. William Preston was reading the same news alert, his expression thoughtful as he observed Patricia's growing distress. As a board member of multiple financial institutions, he seemed to understand something about the situation that others didn't yet grasp. The cabin crew huddled near the cockpit, discussing the maintenance delay. Sarah kept glancing back at their first-class drama, clearly trying to decide how to handle the escalating situation. And Marcus Carter, who had spent his life navigating spaces where people questioned his right to exist, sensed that this flight, if it ever took off, would be unlike any other. The maintenance delay stretched to 30 minutes. Patricia Wellington's composure continued to crack. Her fingers flew across her phone screen, sending urgent messages while continuously checking news updates. "Ms. Wellington," Sarah approached carefully, "we can still reseat you if you're uncomfortable." "No!" The response was too quick, too sharp. "I mean, I need to be in first class, for the extra space." Marcus noticed William Preston typing something on his own phone, his expression grave. Whatever was happening in Atlanta, Preston seemed to have insider knowledge. Another passenger boarded late, a woman in an FBI windbreaker who took a seat in business class, her eyes scanning the cabin with professional interest. Patricia's phone buzzed again. As she read the message, her designer bag slipped from her lap, spilling its content. Papers scattered across the first-class cabin floor. Marcus, operating on instinct, bent to help gather them. A single document caught his eye before Patricia snatched it away, a transfer authorization for an offshore account, with a sum that made his surgeon's salary look like pocket change. "Don't touch my things," she snapped, but her voice trembled. William Preston had seen the document too. He pulled out his phone again, this time making a call. "Tom, Bill Preston here. About that situation we discussed. Yes, I think I've found our missing piece." Patricia froze, her face ashen. The FBI agent in business class shifted slightly, suddenly more alert. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We've been asked to hold at the gate for, some additional security procedures." Marcus watched Patricia's hand shake as she reached for the call button. "I need to deplane," she announced. "Family emergency." "I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment, ma'am," Sarah replied. "We've been asked to keep all passengers in their seats." Through the cabin windows, Marcus could see airport police vehicles approaching the gate. Patricia saw them too. Her breathing became rapid, shallow. "Dr. Carter," she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper, "I'll pay you. Whatever you want, just switch seats with me. Let me sit by the window." And that's when Marcus understood. The window seat, 2A, his seat, was also the emergency exit row. William Preston was still on his phone, speaking quietly, but urgently. The FBI agent had moved closer to first class, casually, but purposefully. Marcus's medical training kicked in as he observed Patricia's symptoms. Dilated pupils, perspiration, increased respiratory rate, classic signs of acute anxiety. "Ms. Wellington," he said softly, using his surgeon's calm in a crisis voice. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, it's not worth it." She laughed, a brittle sound. "Worth it? Do you know what they do to people like me in prison? People who've lived differently?" Outside, more law enforcement vehicles had arrived. The other passengers were starting to notice, phones recording discreetly. Sarah received another message through her earpiece. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked at Patricia. William Preston stood slowly. "Patricia, the FBI has the other account holders. Tom just confirmed it. You can't run from this." "Watch me," Patricia hissed, her hand diving into her bag again. Marcus saw a flash of metal, not a weapon, but a small key on a distinctive red lanyard. Some kind of safety deposit box key, he guessed. The FBI agent was moving now, but Patricia was faster. She bolted for the cabin door, forgetting in her panic that it couldn't be opened while docked at the gate. What happened next would be replayed on news channels for weeks, but the real story, the one about privilege, prejudice, and the price of assumptions, was still unfolding. Marcel's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert about a massive banking scandal, and the name Wellington featured prominently in the headline. But there was more to this story than just financial crimes. In her desperate lunge for the door, Patricia Wellington stumbled, the key flying from her grasp. It skittered across the cabin floor, landing at Marcus's feet. The red lanyard bore the logo of First Atlantic Bank, the institution at the center of the breaking scandal. "Please," Patricia's voice cracked. "You don't understand. That key, there are things in that box that could hurt people, important people." William Preston's phone buzzed again. His face darkened as he read the message. "My God, Patricia. The pension funds?" She straightened, a strange calm suddenly settling over her. "You all think you know what privilege is? Try being a woman in banking 40 years ago. the things I had to do, the compromises I had to make. The FBI agent had reached first class now. Ms. Wellington, step away from the door. But Patricia wasn't finished. And now you, she turned to Marcus, sitting there judging me with your perfect life, your doctor's status. You have no idea. Actually, Marcus interrupted quietly, I do. About compromises, about barriers, about people looking at you and seeing anything but who you really are. For the first time, Patricia really looked at him, not through him or past him, but at him. The difference, he continued, is what we chose to do about it. You chose to hurt others to get ahead. I chose to help them. Sarah received another message through her earpiece. More law enforcement was boarding, but there was something else. A breaking update about the scandal that made her glance at Marcus with sudden recognition. Dr. Carter, she said slowly, didn't you lead the team that operated on those children from the Preston Foundation's medical charity last month? William Preston nodded. 6 kids who would have never received neurosurgery otherwise. Procedures their parents could never afford because their life savings were... He stopped, looking at Patricia. The implication hung heavy in the cabin air. Marcus remembered those surgeries, complex procedures on children whose families had lost everything in what they'd been told was a bank error. Now, looking at Patricia Wellington's designer bag, her expensive jewelry, he understood where that money had really gone. The FBI agent moved closer, handcuffs ready. But Patricia had one more card to play. That key, she said, her voice steady now. It doesn't just open a safety deposit box. It accesses files, records, names, people much more important than me, who did things much worse than what I did. Preston's phone buzzed yet again. Whatever he read made him sink slowly back into his seat. Bill? Patricia's smile was sharp. Would you like me to start naming names? Your name, perhaps? Or should we talk about what really happened to those hospital funds last quarter? The cabin grew very quiet. Phones were still recording. The FBI agent had paused, listening intently. Marcus looked down at the key by his foot. In his career, he'd made countless split-second decisions that changed lives forever. This moment felt surprisingly similar. What he did next would affect more than just this flight or this scandal. It would raise questions about justice, about responsibility, about who really pays the price when systems of privilege protect their own. Sarah's earpiece crackled with another update. Something was happening on the ground that would change everything. But first, the drama in first class had to play out. Through the cabin windows, camera flashes indicated the media had arrived. Whatever happened next would be very public. Marcus thought of those families who'd lost everything, of the children he'd operated on, of all the times he'd been judged by people like Patricia Wellington. The key felt heavy in his hand as he reached down to pick it up. Marcus stood, the key glinting under the cabin light. Everyone seemed to hold their breath. Patricia, Preston, the FBI agent, the watching passengers. You know, he said thoughtfully, in neurosurgery, we have a saying, the smallest details often reveal the biggest problems. He turned the key over, studying the serial number engraved on its surface. Like this number here, it matches something I saw last month, a reference code on one of my patient's medical bills. A 7-year-old girl who needed emergency surgery after her family lost their insurance. The hospital administrator couldn't explain why their coverage had suddenly been canceled. William Preston shifted uncomfortably. Patricia's confident smile faltered slightly. The thing about privilege, Marcus continued, is that it leaves a trail. Every denied claim, every computer error, every clerical mistake that somehow always affects certain people more than others, it all connects. Sarah's earpiece buzzed again. She listened, then whispered something to the FBI agent that made her eyes widen. Dr. Carter, the agent said carefully, we've just received confirmation. Your surgical records from the past year, they're actually what broke this case open. Every patient who was mysteriously denied coverage or lost their savings, you kept detailed notes. Patricia's face drained of color. What? Marcus nodded. When you see the same pattern enough times, you start documenting everything. Every patient who had to choose between life-saving surgery and bankruptcy. Every family destroyed by unexplained financial losses. I sent it all to the hospital's compliance office months ago. Preston was on his phone again, but this time making frantic calls that went straight to voicemail. The names Marcus had heard him dropping earlier, CEOs, hospital board members, bank executives, weren't answering. It's over, the FBI agent announced. The sealed indictments are being opened as we speak. 47 arrests across 6 states. But Patricia had started laughing. A high, unnatural sound. You still don't get it, do you? This goes so much deeper than banking. Every hospital board, every insurance company, every institution that decides who gets care and who doesn't. They're all connected. And you, Dr. Carter, just made some very powerful enemies. That's when Sarah received the most stunning update yet. Something that made her look at Marcus with newfound understanding. Through the cabin windows, more vehicles were arriving. Not just law enforcement, but news van. Someone had tipped off the media about who was really on this flight. Marcus's phone lit up with a message from the hospital board. The contents made him smile slightly, even as Patricia's threats hung in the air. Preston had gone very quiet, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like fear. He seemed to be calculating odds, weighing options, perhaps realizing that the carefully constructed hierarchy he'd helped maintain was about to crumble. The key in Marcus's hand felt heavier by the second. He knew that what he did next wouldn't just affect this moment or these people. It would challenge entire systems of power and privilege that had been in place for generations. Sarah's earpiece crackled one final time. The message she received would change everything. But first, there were truths that needed to be spoken, consequences that needed to be faced. Patricia Wellington, who had started this confrontation by questioning Marcus's right to sit in first class, was about to learn just how far-reaching his influence really was. The plane's engines hummed in the background. Witnesses waited with phones recording, and the next few moments would reveal just how deep this conspiracy truly went. "Tell them, Dr. Carter," Sarah said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Tell them who you really are." Marcus weighed the key in his hand, thinking of all the moments that had led to this one. 2 years ago, I started noticing a pattern in my practice. Patients from certain backgrounds kept experiencing technical issues with their insurance. Life-saving surgeries were being delayed by mysterious paperwork problems. Families were losing their savings to processing errors. He looked directly at Patricia, whose confident demeanor had completely crumbled. So I started tracking everything. Every denial, every delay, every computer glitch that somehow always affected minority patients more severely. I brought my concerns to the hospital board, where they were promptly buried, Preston interjected, his voice bitter. Or so we thought. But that's not what happened, is it, Dr. Carter? The FBI agent prompted. Tell them about Operation Clean Slate. The other passengers leaned forward, phones still recording. Patricia's hands trembled as she clutched her designer bag. I was already working with the FBI, Marcus revealed. Had been for months. Every patient's story, every paper trail, every coincidental banking error. It was all building a case, but we needed more. We needed to prove the discrimination was systematic, intentional. Sarah's earpiece buzzed again. She smiled as she relayed the update. The Attorney General is holding a press conference right now. They're calling it the largest civil rights investigation in healthcare history. Marcus nodded. You see, Ms. Wellington, while you were so concerned about sitting next to me in first class, you never bothered to ask why I was in Boston. It wasn't just for a medical conference. I was meeting with federal prosecutors. Preston had gone completely pale. The Minority Health Initiative, the new funding program, was a trap, Marcus confirmed. We knew certain board members couldn't resist skimming from what they saw as a charity case. Every diverted dollar, every denied claim, every discriminatory decision. It all left a trail leading right back to this key. He held up the red lanyarded key that had started this final act. A safety deposit box full of evidence that wouldn't just expose the banking fraud, but the entire system of institutional discrimination in healthcare. Names, dates, deliberate policies designed to maintain what you called certain standards. Through the cabin windows, they could see the Attorney General on the airport television, announcing indictments that would shake the medical and banking industries to their core. But what you really want to know, Marcus continued, his voice carrying through the hushed cabin, is who I am beyond the color of my skin, beyond the assumptions you made when I walked into first class. Patricia seemed to shrink in her seat as he spoke. The other passengers were completely silent, witnessing history unfold. I'm the grandson of a woman who cleaned hospital rooms for 40 years, watching rich patients receive care her family couldn't afford. I'm the son of a nurse who worked double shifts to put me through medical school, telling me that excellence wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about making things right. His phone buzzed with another update. The arrests were spreading across the country. Hospital boards, insurance executives, banking officials, the whole network of systematic discrimination was unraveling. And now, he said quietly, I'm the newly appointed head of the Federal Healthcare Equity Commission. The president will be announcing it within the hour. Patricia made a small, choked sound. Preston looked like he might faint. So you see, Marcus continued, this seat in first class, it's not just about where I'm sitting. It's about all the people who will finally have a seat at the table, all the families who won't have to choose between life-saving care and bankruptcy, all the patients who won't have their claims denied because of their zip code or their last name. The FBI agent stepped forward, Ms. Wellington, Mr. Preston, you're both under arrest. The charges include financial fraud, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to deny medical care based on racial discrimination. As they were being handcuffed, Patricia finally found her voice again. You don't understand. The whole system. It's too big to change. That's where you're wrong, Marcus replied. Change doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for an invitation to first class. It happens because people refuse to accept the seats they're told they belong in. Sarah received one final update through her earpiece, something that made her beam with pride. Dr. Carter, they're ready for your live statement at Gate 23. The national networks are standing by. Marcus stood, straightening his jacket, the same careful, precise movements he used before every surgery. Ms. Wellington, I believe you were concerned about sitting next to me in first class. Well, don't worry. Where you're going, seating assignments won't be an issue. The other passengers actually applauded as the FBI led Patricia and Preston away. Phones captured every moment, sharing it with a world that was about to understand just how deep institutional discrimination ran, and how it could be dismantled by those brave enough to document, challenge, and change it. But the story wasn't over. As Marcus prepared to address the nation, he knew this was just the beginning of a much larger transformation. The key in his hand would unlock more than just a safety deposit box. It would open doors that had been closed to generations of Americans. Through the windows, camera lights flickered like lightning, heralding a storm about to break across the country's most powerful institutions. Sarah's earpiece crackled with another update, and this one would reveal connections that went even higher than anyone had imagined. The real shock was still to come. As Marcus made his way through the terminal toward Gate 23, surrounded by FBI agents and airline security, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Hospital administrators across the country were resigning. Insurance companies were facing class action lawsuits. Banking executives were racing to turn states evident. But one message stood out, from his grandmother, Dorothy Carter, who still volunteered at the same hospital she'd cleaned for 4 decades. Baby, they're showing it all on TV. Every floor of the hospital is watching. The cleaning staff, the nurses, the orderlies, they're all crying. They're finally being heard. Marcus thought of her as he approached the media staging area. Dorothy Carter had taught him his first lesson about systemic inequality when he was just 6 years old. He'd asked her why she had to clean rich people's hospital rooms instead of getting treatment for her own diabetes. Because sometimes, baby, she'd said, the system isn't broken. It's working exactly how some people designed it to work. The National Press Corps waited at Gate 23, cameras rolling. But before Marcus could reach them, Thomas Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit pulled him aside. Dr. Carter, there's something else you need to know. The safety deposit box, it doesn't just contain evidence about healthcare discrimination. We've found links to judicial appointments, education funding, housing policy. A complete blueprint, Marcus finished, of how systemic racism was institutionalized across every sector. Yes, but more importantly, Chen glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. We found evidence that your father's death wasn't an accident. Marcus felt the floor shift under his feet. James Carter had died 15 years ago when his treatable heart condition was repeatedly misdiagnosed at 3 different emergencies. It had driven Marcus to become a doctor, to ensure no other family would experience that kind of loss. They knew, Chen confirmed. The hospital administrators, the insurance reviewers, they deliberately delayed his care as part of a larger pattern of cost management in minority communities. Through the terminal windows, Marcus could see more news vans arriving. The story was growing beyond healthcare and banking. It was becoming about every system that had ever used privilege as a weapon, every institution that had justified discrimination as policy. His phone buzzed again. The president wanted to speak with him before the press conference, but there was something else. A message from an unknown number. You think arresting a few bankers and hospital boards changes anything? The real power isn't in that safety deposit box. It's in what's not there. Want to know what really happened to your father? Stand down now, or you'll never learn the truth. Sarah Chen, who had followed from the plane, saw his expression change as he read the message. Dr. Carter, the networks are ready. But Marcus was already dialing the FBI's cyber unit. The number that had sent the threat was connected to a series of offshore accounts, which led to shell companies, which pointed to something much bigger than anyone had suspected. Patricia Wellington's earlier words echoed in his mind. This goes so much deeper than banking. Through the terminal glass, he could see Patricia being led to a federal vehicle. She was smiling again, that same confident smile from the plane. She knew something they didn't. Thomas Chen's phone rang. His face grew serious as he listened. Sir, you need to hear this. The safety deposit box key, there's another one. and you're not going to believe where it is. The media waited, cameras pointed at the podium, where Marcus would soon announce changes that would reshape American healthcare. But first, there was one more truth to uncover, one more door to unlock. His grandmother's message had ended with words that now seemed prophetic. Remember, baby, when you're digging up roots, sometimes you find there's a whole other tree growing underneath. Marcus looked at the key in his hand, then at Patricia's retreating figure, then at the waiting press. The real story was just beginning to emerge. The Attorney General was calling now. Something had been discovered in Patricia Wellington's private records that would shake the foundations of not just healthcare, but every major institution in the country. And it all connected back to one night, 15 years ago, when a man named James Carter was denied care at 3 different hospitals. The Attorney General's voice was tight with urgency. Dr. Carter, we've found something in Wellington's encrypted files. A project called Population Management Initiative from 1985. Your father, he wasn't just a victim, he was a witness. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. A witness to what? A meeting at First Atlantic Bank. James Carter was working late that night, maintaining their computer systems. He overheard something he wasn't supposed to. A conversation between bank executives and hospital administrators about what they called demographic control through healthcare access. Thomas Chen spread out a series of documents on a nearby gate counter. They had it all mapped out. Algorithms to flag certain names, addresses, demographics, software to create random delays in insurance processing, systems designed to make discrimination look like coincidence. Through the terminal windows, Marcus could see Patricia being processed for transport. She turned, somehow sensing his gaze, and mouthed 2 words. Ask Eleanor. Eleanor. Marcus hadn't heard that name in years. Eleanor Blackwood, his father's supervisor at First Atlantic's IT department. She'd helped the family with funeral expenses, had written him letters of recommendation for medical school. His phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Eleanor knows, but can you reach her before we do? Sarah Chen, still monitoring airline communications, suddenly grabbed his arm. Dr. Carter, Ms. Blackwood is on flight 237 right now, about to take off from O'Hare to Buenos Aires. Stop that plane, Marcus and Thomas Chen said simultaneously. While federal agents scrambled to contact Chicago authorities, Marcus's grandmother sent another message. Baby, Eleanor used to visit your father at work. She left something in our old house, a box in the attic. I never told anyone. Maybe now it's time. The house where Marcus grew up was just 20 minutes from the airport. The press was still waiting at gate 23, but this couldn't wait. Tell them there's been a delay, he told Sarah. I need 30 minutes. Thomas Chen insisted on accompanying him, along with 2 other agents. As they drove through Atlanta's streets, Marcus's mind raced. His father's death, Eleanor's kindness, Patricia's confidence, it was all connected. His phone kept buzzing with updates. The Population Management Initiative was bigger than anyone had imagined. Hospitals, banks, schools, housing authorities, all using the same sophisticated systems to maintain what they called demographic balance. They reached the old neighborhood. Dorothy Carter still lived in the same modest house where she'd raised 3 children on a cleaner's salary. She was waiting on the porch. Attic's just like it was, she said, hugging Marcus. I never let anyone up there after your father died. Something told me to wait. The box was behind an old trunk, dusty but sealed with clear tape. Inside, they found computer disks, handwritten notes, and photographs. But most importantly, they found a letter from Eleanor Blackwood, dated the day before James Carter died. James, if you're reading this, they found out you copied the files. I've hidden the backup data where they'll never look, with the cleaning staff's records. Your son's college fund isn't just a gift, it's payment for your silence. I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping create efficiency. I didn't know they would take it this far. Eleanor, Marcus's hands shook as he read. Thomas Chen was already calling it in, setting up a secure evidence team. His phone lit up with breaking news. Flight 237 had been stopped on the runway at O'Hare. Eleanor Blackwood was in custody. But Patricia Wellington was still smiling in her federal transport vehicle because Eleanor wasn't running from prosecution. She was running towards something hidden in Buenos Aires that would reveal the final piece of this decades-long conspiracy. Dorothy Carter watched her grandson processing it all. Your father used to say, sometimes the truth is like surgery. You have to cut deep to heal right. Marcus looked at his watch. The press was waiting. The president was waiting. The country was waiting. But first, there was one more truth to excavate, one more layer of this systemic disease to expose. His phone buzzed again. The unknown number. You found Eleanor, but do you really want to know what's in Buenos Aires? Some doors should stay locked, doctor. Through the attic window, Marcus could see federal agents securing the perimeter of his childhood home. This wasn't just about healthcare anymore. It wasn't even about discrimination. It was about power, how it was built, maintained, and protected, and the price paid by those who dared to challenge it. As Marcus descended from the attic, Dorothy Carter pressed something else into his hand, a small key on a faded blue ribbon. "Eleanor left this too," she said quietly. "Said if anything ever happened to your father, I should give it to you when the time was right. It goes to a locker at First Atlantic's old downtown branch." Thomas Chen was already on his phone, coordinating with agents in Chicago. Eleanor Blackwood was refusing to speak without her lawyer present, but her laptop had been seized, and its contents were explosive. "Dr. Carter," Chen called out, "you need to see this. The Population Management Initiative wasn't just about healthcare access. It was a test run for something bigger. Project Legacy." Marcus's phone lit up with secure documents being forwarded from the FBI's cyber unit. Project Legacy was a comprehensive plan to ensure what its architects called generational stability maintenance. Through sophisticated algorithms and carefully structured policies, it would systematically deny opportunities to certain demographics while making it appear random and unconnected. They needed my father's expertise in database management, Marcus realized. He wasn't just a witness, he was supposed to help build it. And when he refused, Chen added grimly, they made an example of him. Dorothy Carter sat heavily in her old rocking chair. "James came home that last night so upset, said he'd seen something terrible at work. The next day," her voice trailed off. Marcus's phone buzzed again. The unknown number had sent coordinates in Buenos Aires, a location that matched an address found in Eleanor's files. Sarah Chen called from the airport. "Dr. Carter, we've found something in the airline's historical records. Eleanor Blackwood has been making regular trips to Buenos Aires for 20 years. Always staying at the same private medical facility." A medical facility? Something clicked in Marcus's mind. "The first version of the algorithm," he said slowly. "They needed somewhere to test it, somewhere outside U.S. jurisdiction, somewhere they could prove their system of demographic control actually worked." Thomas Chen's face darkened. A whole hospital full of data. 20 years of proof that they could control who lived and died through selective access to care. Then Marcus thought of the patients he'd treated over the years, the families who'd lost loved ones to unavoidable complications and unfortunate timing. How many of those deaths had been engineered by an algorithm designed to maintain social hierarchies? His grandmother reached for his hand. "Baby, remember what your father always said about systems? They're only as strong as the truth they're built on," Marcus finished. The words felt different now, heavy with new meaning. Through the window, he could see more federal vehicles arriving. The evidence team was here to process the attic finding, but the old bank key in his hand seemed to burn with urgency. His phone lit up with another update. Patricia Wellington was now offering to cooperate in exchange for leniency. She claimed to have access to Project Legacy's complete database, decades of documented discrimination disguised as digital destiny. But first, there was that locker at First Atlantic's downtown branch. Whatever Eleanor had left there 20 years ago was important enough to protect with elaborate fail-safes and multiple keys. The press was still waiting at the airport. The president's office was calling again. The story was growing beyond anything they'd imagined, and somewhere in Buenos Aires, a medical facility held 20 years of proof that systematic discrimination could be coded, quantified, and controlled, unless someone was brave enough to expose it all. Marcus looked at his watch. "How fast can we get to downtown First Atlantic?" "Already got a team en route," Chen replied. "But Dr. Carter, are you sure you want to pull this thread? Some very powerful people spent decades building this system. They won't let it fall without a fight." Through the window, Marcus could see news vans starting to arrive in his grandmother's neighborhood. The story was spreading faster than anyone could control. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from Eleanor Blackwood herself, somehow sent from custody. "The locker contains the truth about choice protocol. God forgive me for what we created." Dorothy Carter squeezed his hand. "Go find the truth, baby. Your father died protecting it. Now it's your turn to set it free." The old bank key felt heavier by the second. Whatever choice protocol was, it was big enough to kill for, big enough to hide for decades, and big enough to shake the foundations of American society. But first, they had to reach that locker before someone else did. The downtown branch of First Atlantic Bank stood like a mausoleum of old money, its marble columns reaching into the darkening Atlanta sky. As Marcus approached, flanked by federal agents, he thought about how it all started. A first-class airline seat and one woman's refusal to acknowledge his right to occupy it. The bank's vault area had been secured by FBI team. The old locker, untouched for 20 years, waited like a time capsule of buried truth. When Marcus inserted Eleanor's key, the lock turned with a sound that echoed through the vault. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. Choice protocol wasn't just an algorithm, it was a philosophy, the systematic management of human potential through controlled access to resources. Healthcare was just the beginning. They wanted to play God, deciding which communities would thrive and which would quietly disappear through 1,000 small denials. James discovered they were using his code to build digital walls around entire neighborhoods, creating invisible barriers that would last generations. When he threatened to expose it, they showed him exactly how their system worked by making sure every hospital he visited that night had equipment failures in cardiac care. The proof is all here. The meetings, the planning sessions, the statistical models showing exactly how many lives they could engineer through selective denial of services. They called it demographic optimization. I helped build it. God forgive me. I helped them create a system that could kill without leaving fingerprints. But James showed me the truth, and now I'm showing it to you. Everything you need is on this drive. Names, dates, the entire architecture of institutional racism encoded into digital DNA. Use it wisely. Eleanor. As cyber teams began processing the drive's contents, Marcus's phone exploded with notification. Patricia Wellington was talking, revealing a network that reached into every corner of American power. Eleanor Blackwood's facility in Buenos Aires was being raided, its records showing 20 years of carefully documented population management through healthcare manipulation. The president's office called again. The press conference would need to be bigger. This wasn't just about healthcare discrimination anymore. It was about exposing a decades-long conspiracy to maintain social hierarchy through technological apartheid. Thomas Chen approached with another update. Dr. Carter, the choice protocol files. They're still active. The system is still running in hospitals across the country, right now. Marcus thought of his father, of all the James Carters who had died, because an algorithm decided their lives were statistically expendable. He thought of Patricia Wellington, so certain of her right to first-class comfort that she never questioned the cost to others. Dorothy Carter's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes, baby, healing means tearing down what's broken to build something true. He stepped up to the bank of microphones waiting outside. Cameras flashed as he held up the USB drive. 20 years ago, my father discovered a system designed to digitize discrimination. Today, we begin dismantling it, not just in healthcare, but in every institution where bias has been coded into policy. The journey that began with a first-class airline seat ends here, with first-class justice for all. The story exploded across global media. Project Legacy's architects were arrested. Hospital systems were overhauled. Banking algorithms were exposed and rewritten. A century of systematic discrimination, disguised as digital efficiency, was laid bare. Patricia Wellington and her co-conspirators faced federal charges. Eleanor Blackwood's testimony revealed how deep the rot went and how many lives had been calculated as acceptable losses in their demographic engineering. 1 year later, Marcus stood in the new Federal Healthcare Equity Commission headquarters, built where First Atlantic Bank once stood. On his wall hung 2 items, his father's old ID badge from the bank's IT department and a framed first-class airline ticket. Reminders that change sometimes starts with a single seat, and justice with a single stand. The Commission's first act was implementing the Carter Protocol, a new system ensuring equal access to health care regardless of demographic factors. Hospitals across the country now displayed a simple motto: every seat first class, every life first priority. Dorothy Carter attended the Commission's opening ceremony, wearing James's old watch. As she hugged her grandson, she whispered, "Look what grew from standing your ground, baby." Sometimes the best revenge against a broken system is building a better one. Marcus thought of that day on the plane, of Patricia Wellington's disgust at his presence in first class. She now watched the Commission's work from a federal prison cell, as the system she helped build was dismantled piece by piece. The old key from Eleanor still sat on his desk, a reminder that unlocking truth was just the beginning. The real work was in building something better from the ruins of revelation. And somewhere in Atlanta, a young black girl boarded a plane, walking confidently into first class. No one questioned her right to be there. That, perhaps, was the truest measure of how far they'd come. The story of first class became more than headline news. It became a turning point in American history, a moment when one man's refusal to accept his assigned place exposed and transformed an entire system of digital discrimination. As Marcus Carter looked out from his commission office at the city below, he smiled, knowing that every seat in every institution was now truly first class for everyone.